Chive Pancake starts out in a rather different way than most doughs that we're used to, and that's one of the reasons that it's such an interesting recipe. You use boiling water instead of cold water or warm water to mix it, and that gelatinizes some of the starch, which makes a very smooth dough, you'll see, and makes the noodly, crunchy, chewy texture that we like in the finished pancake. So I'm using about 14 ounces of all-purpose flour. In non-pandemic times, I would use a mix of all-purpose and cake flour to have a very sort of a lighter touch to it. But during these times, this is the flour I have, so it's the flour I'm using. I'm adding a teaspoon of salt to 14 ounces of flour. And then I'll add 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil. And probably we'll start out with about 1.25 cups of boiling water and see how that looks. Using all-purpose flour only changes a little bit the way that water is absorbed, so I had to punt a little bit to do it, but again, that's what I have. You can see it's making a very gluey looking dough, and that's the gelatinization process, which is critical to making this recipe actually work well. So I'm being careful now not to add too much water, because at this point you can't really see how much water is already in these clumps. A tiny bit more. It's a nice idea to make the dipping sauce ahead so that the flavors can develop. It's a very simple sauce. Again, I've had to modify it a bit because of pandemic times. You'll see in Recipe and Cooking with Fire that I call for 2 fancy types of soy sauce. Today, I'm reduced to using the soy sauce we can buy at our local store, and it's fine. It's completely fine. So a couple of tablespoons of soy sauce, a tablespoon of rice vinegar. Speaking of food anxiety, we're going to have a trip to the grocery store soon. Tablespoon of rice vinegar, and then depending on how spicy you like things, a little bit of this sambal oelek or any other hot thing you have around your house you can use. Again, during pandemic times, I'm going to add, that's about a teaspoon or so, because I like it to be spicy. And then this mess is going to be way too salty to enjoy as it is. So it's key to add enough water to sort of open it up. And that requires tasting. And because I'm serving this to only my family, I stuck my finger in it. Okay, that will sit until we're ready to enjoy it. So the chives are all in flour now, and they're great to use when they're not flouring because the main thing we're eating are the long thin leaves. But I'm going to, because these chives are so thick and they're impinging on my lettuce, I'm going to just snip off a huge amount, big clump I mean, and sort them out later. You could also dig these right up, which may be what I end up doing in the future to try to open this bed up. Because if you start growing chives yourself, you'll find that they will just take right over any space you give them. These two. Those little roots will come back as well. So, but probably not flour again. This should be more than enough for our pancakes. Put these flowers aside for later because they're so pretty and they're edible and you can use them in different things. The flower stalks themselves, though, are a little bit too rigid to be delicious in a pancake, so I'm snipping off the parts that I will not be using, putting those aside, and then putting the tender leafy greens to chop up. You can chop, of course, on a cutting board with a knife. I'm going to cut them with that's a Luna chopping blade. The dough has had a good rest. It feels very soft and pliable. It's a little too much so. I'm going to put a little flour down to keep it from sticking. And I'm not going to overwork it at this point because the point of resting is to rest. Overworking it would get it all excited again, and it would then require another rest before we could work it. The idea is to be able to roll it out very thinly, and you can't do that with very overactive gluten. It feels like it would be nice and soft and easy to roll out. So I'm going to cut it into 8 portions, I think, to make 8 pretty good sized pancakes. And it's very easy to get at more or less even size without using a scale, which of course you get the most even size, but by rolling it into a log first, because then you can get a good idea about the size of the piece that you're working with. Putting a little bit of flour underneath to keep it from sticking, but I don't want to incorporate any more flour than necessary. So just enough to keep it moving. You can see when I'm rolling it out, I'm using the rolling pin to push the dough from the center. I'm not putting a lot of pressure and rolling through the whole thing. I'm really just working from the center outwards. And that technique of rolling will work for you whether you're making pie crust or pizza or any kind of dough you're trying to stretch out. So I'm only rolling it as far as it very easily rolls, because a lot of the crispiness and crunchiness of this and the layering effect comes not from this step, but from the next step. So I have here some Chinese toasted sesame oil that I'm going to coat lightly the entire surface. And a good clump of chives. And now I'll roll it up. And then roll it the other way, like a snail. Give it a little pinch together, a gentle pressure downwards, and then let it rest while we roll out the other ones. I'll roll them all out and prepare them like that before getting to cooking, because they don't take too long to cook. So to cook these pancakes, I have made a really small fire with the first 3 rocks that came to hand around it, because I'm going to use this pan right here. I'm on a little hillside, which might be a problem if I were using this pan. It would be hard to level up. But this one really adapts very well to an off-level situation. It infinitely adapts to level, essentially. So I'm heating up my skillet, And I'm preparing to do the final rolling on these. Again, this is where you need to be especially careful about using a light touch. If you really jam on this, you'll drive out a lot of the layering effects that all of that complex geometry you applied to this during the double rolling process. All that geometry gave you what should be a nice flaky, chewy pancake. And if I really overwork this at this point, I'll drive some of that out. So I'm not trying to make this as thin as possible. I'm trying to achieve something under 1/4 of an inch, but not too much less, more than 8. So I think what I'm getting for smoke is coming from this pan because it's hot. Let me take it off the fire for a sec. And because of frying, many flatbreads are made on a dry frying pan, but this is actually a fried noodle essentially. And it's already pretty good and hot. That's frying nicely. It's pretty hot. If I decided that it was really too hot for a moment, that's something a little bit difficult to deal with in your own kitchen. But here outside, I can just take the pan off and put it in a cool spot for a second, and that will really cool the frying down. And if you were making a lot of these and you decided that the arrangement wasn't quite right, maybe some larger rocks would work better for you. There's a lot of just sort of figuring to do each time you do a project like this. But that's the fun of it. I think this heat's pretty good, actually. You want to take a couple minutes on each side, 2 to 3 minutes on each side, to get it nice and cooked all the way through. It's good when you're doing this sort of work to have a variety of different fuel around you, just so that you can take your pick, take your choice. Like right now, I've lost my flames a little bit, so even adding just a few pine needles on one side will help bring that back. Another thing about using little twigs is that they don't take long to burn out, so things change very quickly from hot to cool, and you can see that just by watching what's going on. You can see the pan's cooled down a good bit, well, partly because I cooled it. Perhaps in the COVID era, I should invest in a bellows so that I'm no longer blowing near my food. Another thing you can do is take the food away and blow on the fire. As I mentioned, these chive flowers are edible and they're quite lovely. You could put them right inside the pancake if you wanted to, but that seems like kind of a waste. But they look quite lovely as part of our sauce. Or some other kind of garnish, great on a salad. With a lovely subtle chive aroma. Cool enough to eat, so we'll try it.
Not until the wine shows up.
Can I serve you some?